So I'm realizing immediately that my title is very long and wordy, and I'm going to shorten it probably next time I give this talk. So this is the first time I've given this talk, so hopefully all the slides are in order correctly, and I haven't missed anything. But please feel free to raise your hand, ask a question if you have any as I go along. So I'm going to talk about a couple of events first before I continue. The first one is a local Atlanta event that a lot of you here may be familiar with already called Connect Tech. I'm giving the same presentation at that conference. Any slide that has a URL should also have a QR code on it in case you're interested in going to the URL. It's much easier than trying to type it in. There are also usually some discount codes floating around for this event. So if you do decide to sign up, do some quick Google, see if you can find a discount code out there. But it's an excellent front-end conference. They have tracks on React and Angular. There'll probably be some Svelte stuff there and other Astro, a lot of the current emerging JavaScript tech, a lot of front-end technology there. They do have a back-end track as well. The other thing I'm going to mention, I ran into at least one person here who's in East Atlanta. There's a small meetup that I've just started. I think there's only 110 people there, but it's on the east side. It's in Decatur, called the Lunch Bunch. And this is just really targeted at people in technology who might work from home or hybrid. You don't get to see other humans very much. We've had only 3 meetings so far, 2 at the brick store in downtown Decatur, 1 at Twain's, where the pool tables and stuff are. And I think the next one, I haven't scheduled it yet, but I think it'll probably be at the Comet Bowling Alley that's in Decatur. There's no agenda or anything. It's really just to get out of the house, meet some other nerdy people, talk shop, have a little lunch, and make some new friends. So I'll talk about that. Everybody's got their cameras out, hopefully. All right. So on to the presentation. A little bit about me. This is me and my son, Adrian. I'm a Cub Scout dad. I've been writing code since roughly 1995, so almost 30 years now. I was talking to somebody earlier where, 6 years or so of node development for me, I feel like I'm still starting. That's some people's whole careers, but to me, I feel like I'm really just still starting in it just because it's been such a long time and a lot of tech. Back in the day, I did straight HTML to begin with, some Cold Fusion. I did Flash code, ActionScript, Flex, which was a kind of a Flash thing for a while. But more recently, I've been focusing on AWS architecture, AWS infrastructure, a lot of DevOps automation. I really love serverless technology. And the tech stack, the language I reach for first is typically TypeScript, even though that's not appropriate for every use case. That's kind of my favorite right now. Cub Scout dad. I make a lot of random 90s pop culture references. I probably can't remember what I had for lunch today, but I can quote a movie from the 90s. There's a few of those sprinkled in here in the presentation. And then foosball. If anybody plays foosball afterward, if there's a bar that has foosball, I would love to play foosball. I've had one in the office, a table, for a long time, so I like playing a lot. On to the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tool that I'm talking about is called Projen. Has anybody here used Projen at all? Anyone at all? Okay, that's kind of what I expected. So I like that I'm showing a new tool to everybody. But I'm going to start off by describing the problem that this tool is really designed to solve and does solve for me and many other people. And hopefully you will be inspired to use it as well. So we'll talk about the problem it's going to solve. A quick diversion into some related technologies that you may be interested in looking at as well. And then we'll talk some about Projen, and that hopefully will be about the half-hour mark, and we'll switch to a code editor and we can play with some code and see what the tool does and do some Q&A. There's a lot, especially since no one's used it, there's going to be a lot of new information, a lot of other, the diversion is a lot of other side technologies as well. So again, there are QR codes everywhere, and I may not be able to answer all the questions. You may have to do some homework on your own. So everyone here, I guess, has built some kind of Node project, right? Anybody completely new to Node? Also, exactly like I thought. So Node seems on its surface to be pretty simple. If you go to the documentation, according to the documentation, the way that you start a Node project is just by doing npm init-y. It's going to give you something about like this, which seems pretty simple on the surface. But as we all know, that is not true. That is a lie. It is much more complicated than that. There's a lot more configuration that goes into a Node project, especially over time as it grows and passes through many hands. So I got some advice from ChatGPT, and the prompt that I entered was generate an image that represents a typical node project. This looks more accurate to me. There are all these pieces that are interconnected, and it seems very complicated. So this is more what I see when I encounter node projects. And this tool, Projen, is really built to help you manage this complexity and automate a lot of the complexity away for you. So the problem that we're trying to solve right now, when someone creates a node project, there's 3 strategies that I see people usually use the most. The first one is a create script of some sort. And every framework has a create React app, or which I hear is not the way to do it anymore, but I don't do a lot of React. If you're creating a Vue app or an Astro app, almost every single JavaScript library is going to have some kind of create script that gets you like a starter template. So that's one way that I see people do it. Another way, and I've done these myself as well, is to find some kind of a project that you like, that you've recently done, and you think it's probably pretty well configured, and you just copy that into a new folder, and then you start renaming the things that need to be renamed, and eventually it gets to a state where you're ready to go, and you check it into Git, and this is your new project, right? That's another way that I see people develop new node projects. And there's a third way that I see often as well, and that is doing it from scratch. Legit starting from 0 and adding packages one at a time on the command line and adding configurations one at a time on the command line. There are probably some other ways, but those are the main ways that I see people begin node projects. But there's a problem with that. And the problem is that the second that you finish that process and start writing actual code, JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever it is, everything else about the project starts aging. The packages, new versions come out of the package, for the package probably within a week. You've got something that's old in your project already, unless you really stay on top of it, right? So it's kind of like driving that new car off the lot. The second you cross over the edge of the lot, it starts to depreciate, and you start to accumulate technical debt. And that debt is in many, many places, maybe more places than you think inside of your project. The first thing that I see that's kind of the easiest surface level debt is what I already mentioned, which is package versions. So a package that you're using, a new version may come out. There may be some deprecations of some deep level dependency, sub-dependency of a project that you're working on. There may be security updates that have occurred on the package that you're using that you need to handle. And there are some solutions for this already. Renovate or RenovateBot is one. Dependabot, which is a GitHub thing, will go through your packages by some schedule that you can configure and alert you to packages that have security vulnerabilities or that need to be upgraded. And they may even upgrade it for you and open a PR. And then you can review that PR, see if you like it, and maybe accept it. And that is one way to do it. Projen also handles this problem for you in a different way. I'm going to stop just for a second. Is it everybody following? Anybody have any questions so far or comments or anything? All right. The next thing that I see that is debt that collects immediately, your package JSON file, there may be things in it that get out of date. You may have npm configuration things that you have to worry about. If it's a package that you're distributing, you may have an ignore file to make sure that certain files don't get out in your package when you release your package. That needs to be maintained, and you may miss something. You may put a .env file in there and not realize that it's there, gets checked in, ends up in your package, and you don't want that. So maintaining that is very important. And if you're using a monorepo or any kind of workspace setup, then that is usually either configured in your package JSON, or it may be in a separate file, a Yarn workspace file or a PNPM workspace file. So that also gets out of date unless you work to make sure that it stays up to date. There are different package managers. If you're in an enterprise and you acquire another company or some other thing changes politically within the organization, you may need to switch from Yarn 1 to Yarn 2 or NPM to PNPM. Somebody may be trying to use Bun. Switching between these package managers, can you picture like your node project that you have right now? If you tried to switch package managers, what the implications might be, the workspace file, all the other unique configurations to that package manager that you might have to keep in mind. So that's another thing that this tool helps manage for you. And you can see here, I've highlighted, I like PNPM, and PNPM really likes this little configuration blob to be in your package JSON file, at least for PNPM 9. So that's one example. in my own code base. Git configuration. So you will probably have a Git attributes, or more commonly a Git ignore, to make sure you're ignoring certain things like that .env file that shouldn't be checked into Git. And there may be other sensitive files that you need to keep up with. So managing that becomes a problem. If you're using TypeScript, which is very popular, I imagine most of you are probably using some version of TypeScript at this point if you're doing JavaScript development, you may have multiple TypeScript config files. You may have one for development, one for building for production, some other ones for testing, and managing those and keeping track of them. Sometimes there's strategies where you've got a base, you extend that, into a development one, and then you extend again for production copy. And if you have a mono repo, it may get even more complicated with extending these all over the place. So managing that is something that becomes debt pretty quickly as well. We get a little deeper into the tooling. If you're using any kind of linting configuration like Prettier or ESLint, you're going to have a few configurations for each of these. And Prettier and ESLint kind of need to know about each other in order to know what the linting rules are. Not only do those tools need to know about each other, but if you're using TypeScript, like this highlighted line 16 here, you may need to know about the TypeScript configuration as well. And which one is it? Is the dev one? Is it the prod one? Which one are you using? So more complexity that's introduced into your configuration. You've got testing frameworks. These have configurations too. You may be using Jest. vtest is the new hotness for testing. You may be using that. You may be using end-to-end tests like Cypress or Playwright, or you may be doing Lighthouse tests after a deployment to make sure that your website is still going to rank well in Google, SEO is right, and that it loads properly. Those are all, again, configurations that you have to manage by hand. All of these things that I mentioned so far are things that the tool can help you with, and I'm talking about Projen. Other things that you may not think about, if you use VS Code, there's a .VS Code folder that you may save your configuration for the project in. This is a good idea for teams that work together and you want to have similar linting, for example. This TypeScript line 9 through 13 here applies to TypeScript and will automatically format your code when you hit save in the editor. And you probably want that to be consistent across your entire development team. So putting that into the settings.json file that's inside of VS Config makes a lot of sense. This is also just even more configuration that you have to manage yourself. We haven't even gotten to the frameworks yet. So React has configuration needed to manage. Tailwind has some configuration. If you're using Next or Nuxt, Vue, Vite, if you're using a static site generator like Gatsby or Astro or VitePress, all of these also have configurations. And not everybody may get exposed to the pipeline. Some people may have a different team that does this, but this is also a piece of configuration that typically lives in your repo. And this would be pipelines for GitHub Actions, GitLab, ADO, CircleCI, whoever you're using. There's some kind of a YAML file or something, or multiple ones, somewhere in your repo that run these pipelines for you. That's also configuration that you have to manage by hand. And even if you're just using one of those, if you're only using GitHub, you may have a separate workflow for building when you do a PR. You may have one to release a package to NPM, right? That's different. That might also build first. You might have deployments. If you're deploying to AWS, that script probably needs to know some secrets from somewhere that has to be configured consistently across multiple repos, multiple pieces of a mono repo. There's a lot of complexity that can get introduced there for deployments. Lighthouse audits, if you're running them, those are often part of the pipeline. So not only do you have to configure Lighthouse, but you have to configure the pipeline to call that tool and run it as a part of your automation process. Particularly in large organizations, security audits are very important. And if you have 20 repos across 20 teams in a bigger company, there's a security person somewhere who is really paranoid and wants the security checks to be identical in all 20 of those repos. And that can be very difficult to manage and give that person a big headache. And package updates, which I mentioned earlier, RenovateBot and DependABot are two ways to do package updates, but Projen also builds, and I'll show you update pipeline for you automatically that does something similar to what those tools do. And the last thing that is not really something that you directly configure, but I like to think of as a complexity multiplier. So this is something where you've already got kind of a complicated configuration, but how do you make it even more complicated? Now you have a mono repo, and the mono repo may have 20 subprojects in it, Most of them are similarly configured, but one or two or each of them may have some very minor detail that's slightly different, that's very important, different version of a package or a different configuration for testing or something that's unique to that project. It gets even harder if it's not a monorepo and those 20 projects are spread across 20 repos. How do you keep their configurations consistent? And even more complicated than that is multiple languages. If you have Python and TypeScript and non-TypeScript JavaScript all in the same monorepo, how do you manage the differences in configurations and tooling that are required for all of those? So those are things that just exponentially make it more complicated. I'm gonna fix this. There we go, it was tilted down. So how do we manage this? How does Projen manage this? And the first thing that you have to think about is, what is it exactly that you need to manage if you're managing this configuration? And the problem actually seems much simpler when you think about this, because all of the configuration for almost all of the tooling that I just talked about fall into these three buckets. One is a plain text file like an INI, like think about gitignore. It's just a list of files, right? It's very straightforward, just a text file with a list, right? You've got YAML and JSON files, which are really both objects. It could be a JavaScript object, it's arrays, it's named value pairs, and you serialize that to do two different formats, but its origin is really the same. So you can take a YAML file and turn it into a JSON or JSON back to YAML, because it's really just representing a hierarchy of data that's an array or key values. So that's in Projen, that's called the object file. And then you've got source files, and I'm noticing a lot of tools start to use these more now, because you want to be able to have JavaScript run as part of your configuration, and a static YAML file just can't do that. So the last category here, which is a little bit harder, is JavaScript, or sometimes it's a .cjs or mjs or .ts file that's your configuration. So some sort of really source file that is still, by the way, almost always just JSON, except for a couple of lines that are like a function or something, but most of it is really still just structured data. So that kind of describes what the problem that we're facing is, and most companies and most organizations try to manage this by hand, and it's a very heavy task to manage. So the remaining slides really talk about what Projen is. Projen is the tool that I like to use. I've used it for a couple of years now to manage Node projects. It'll also help you manage Python projects and some other types of projects. And what it claims to be on its website, is that it synthesizes project configuration files. That's what we just talked about, all these configuration files we need to synthesize from well-typed definitions, and that's TypeScript. The first language in this tool is TypeScript, even though you can use Go and Python and some other languages. Its native language is really TypeScript. So you've got these strongly typed definitions available to you. It's written in a JSII compatible language, and JSII, I'm counting on no one knowing what that is. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And it reduces project configuration management fatigue. So what that says is that it's reducing my cognitive load. It gives me one less thing that I have to worry about day to day, and I can focus on writing code and be a little bit less paranoid that some random YAML file has gotten out of date somewhere in a project. And all of that kind of shifts your project left. So increasing productivity and confidence, this is along the lines of shifting left. You're getting things right from the beginning. You're not discovering errors at the end of the process. You're getting it right kind of in the beginning, and you don't have to worry about it as much at the end. That's the paragraph on their page. That's how I kind of think about it. So like I said, by default, you use TypeScript to build a Projen project. It's also available in Go, Python, and Java as languages. And the reason for that is the other tool that I kind of skipped over just a second ago. I'm going to dive into that for just a minute. It's JSII. Look at this if you're interested in it. I'm just going to explain what it does. It basically is a way to take what is a TypeScript project or a JavaScript project and make it that same project also compatible with Go, Java, a lot of other languages. And it's used for the Cloud Development Kit, the AWS Cloud Development Kit, which is huge, very popular, used by thousands of developers all day long to deploy code into AWS. And so what JSII really is a wrapper for each one of those languages that goes around the node project. So you may have a function or a method or some kind of a class that's written in TypeScript or JavaScript, and you want to execute it in Go. There's a Go wrapper that goes around it, and the same interfaces are exposed, but the syntax is different. Something's capitalized in one language where it's lowercase in another. Those sorts of things are understood and rewritten by JSII into this wrapper. And you may say, Cameron, that sounds terrible. That sounds really slow. I can't believe that you have a wrapper around it. That's fine, really, in this use case, because you're not going to build, this tool is not for building APIs. You're not building something that has to be performant. This tool is specifically aimed at developer tools and build tools. This is something you're going to use to maintain your node project. There's not going to be 1,000 simultaneous users. There's going to be one simultaneous user, and it's going to be you. So it's not really that big of a deal that there's this layer of abstraction that feels a little weird at first. So what it basically does is you can take a class like this that would be written in JavaScript or TypeScript, and when you call it in JavaScript, once you run it through JSII, you can call it through JavaScript just like you would expect, but you can also call it using Java with a slightly different syntax. So it's basically compiled it down to Java for you, Java wrapper. Python wrapper, slightly different language, but it's the same methods. The Go wrapper, you'll notice that the greet method here is capitalized where it's not capital in the others, because that's just a Go thing that they capitalize their method names. I haven't written a lot of Go, but that's what it looks like is true. And then C# is another one of the languages that it supports. So C# is slightly different as well. And you get all of this out of the box just by using JSII. Probably nobody here is going to have a real big use case for this immediately, but I wanted to go over it because it's part of the puzzle. Projen does use JSII. That's how you can use Projen in Python and other pieces as well. Two other technologies that I'm going to mention, but this is the only one slide that I have for them. One is the AWS CDK. This is the Cloud Development Kit. It uses JSII. It does a similar job to Terraform, which you've probably heard of in your organization, that builds cloud infrastructure for you, but it is programmatic. So the AWS CDK, you use TypeScript typically. You can use other things, but TypeScript is its default home language to say, I want a database that is configured this way, and I would like an API configured this way, and Cloud Front Edge function configured this way. You define it all programmatically using TypeScript, which is much cleaner and nicer, I think, than using Terraform. But it also uses JSII. And there's one other one, if you really want to kind of break your brain a little bit, is called Smithy. This is one of the least known, these are all AWS family libraries. And the Smithy project was originally an internal project at AWS. And it is an amazing, interesting thing to me. You write IDL, Interface Definition Language, I think is what that stands for, of something like an API. And it will, instead of JSII, which wraps it, it will rewrite it in each of those languages instead. So if you've ever used the version 3 of the AWS JavaScript API, that is generated using Smithy. All of the most recent versions of AWS's API have already been generated using Smithy. So Python, Go, all of those come from the same tool, and it's Smithy. It is not documented as well as some of the other tools, and it was internal and has just been made external. So it does break your brain a little, but I find it to be an extremely interesting. If you want to dive into some code and like learn a new thing that is very confusing at the same time, that's a good one to do. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there. Yes. Yeah. 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 So it takes the IDL, which is really just, it looks maybe a little bit like a GraphQL file or something. It's just like words separated by space. And it takes that and distills it down to AST, basically, which is just this giant JSON file. And then it uses that AST then to generate the API. So it's not generating the whole API. If your API is like save an item to a database, it's generating the API interface and then just leaving a stub that you have to then program. It just makes sure that the externally facing interfaces are all identical, basically. Yeah. Anything else? All right. So I'll dig into Projen a little bit. Projen's been around for 3 or 4 years now. It's still version 0. It's a AWS open source project. They do have a full-time maintainer on staff at AWS. Mr. Grain is his handle. I can't remember what his real name is. He lives in Europe somewhere. They are working towards version 1 soon. The Amazon reInvent conference is in November. Usually they like to announce things then. Maybe this will reach 1.0 by then. They haven't said that, but that just tends to happen. So this URL here is the issue that lists all the things that are remaining in order for them to consider themselves to be a fully 1.0 release. So if you decide to go home and try Projen and you think it's a little rough around a certain edge, go look at this, look at the issues, ask a question. They're very responsive in the group. There are some rough edges, but there aren't very many. Like there's way less now than there were a couple of years ago. Most of the things in this ticket fall into 3 buckets. Some kind of refactoring for something that was done a long time ago as a shortcut, and they were going to fix it later, and guess what? Never got fixed, so they got to do that before version 1. The documentation is way better than it used to be. It's actually pretty decent, but it's not very deep, and they want to work on the documentation a little bit more. And then the rest of it is around tooling, and it mentions Windows support, but I know I've used it on Windows before, so if you're a Windows person, may not work, may work, I don't know. I used it on a Mac, it works pretty well. I have deployed it on Windows machines before and it's worked, so I don't know what parts of it are not compatible. Sometimes it fires up Docker, things like that, and maybe that, when you get into some of those other third-party runtimes, maybe that's where the problems are. So that's kind of where it's heading. And let's talk about if you want to build a project using Projen, how do you do that? And then I'm gonna show you some code. I got 9 more slides and we'll do some code. So creating a project is kind of like technique number 1 that I talked about earlier. There's a create script. So you run npx projen new, and then you can put TypeScript. There's a bunch of other project types. I'm showing you guys TypeScript today, so this is what I picked. But if you do type help, it's going to show you the project types. CDK apps. There's some CDK for Terraform apps. There's CDKs, which is Kubernetes, CDK. Java projects, Next.js, JavaScript, Next.js, TypeScript, React, JavaScript, React, TypeScript, straight up TypeScript project, which is the second one from the bottom, which is more like a package, really. And the app, the TypeScript and the TypeScript app are almost identical. The first one is kind of a package, and the second one just doesn't do the release pipeline and a lot of those things that you would need if you're releasing a package. But you see also the Python is in there, regular plain Jane Node project if you want it. A lot of different project types, and you can make your own project type, which is one of the things that is most exciting to me, is that if you get a configuration that you really like, that is company X's blessed configuration for a project, you can make that a package, and you can release that internally or npm or wherever, and you can consume that in your other projects. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, I don't see Rust on there, and Rust is the next language that I'm excited to learn as well. I just haven't gotten into it. But if you look at the source code of what Projen is, 90% of it is just managing configurations in some sort of class or object, and then writing it to a text file. So if your Rust configuration is done in text files, even if it doesn't, yeah, so TOML, right. So it's just another format, right? Just like YAML or anything else. So I can't remember if it has TOML built in or not. It might already have it in, but it probably isn't very hard to add if you wanted to. And so, yeah, I mean, you could build something if it doesn't already exist, for sure, for that. I don't see it in here immediately, though. Yeah, I agree. So if you generate the TypeScript project, it generates a TS file. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road. This is what builds everything for you. And there is so much behind this that is doing work for you. But the first 2 lines here, the line 5 and 6 are really the only 2 arguments that you have to pass in for this TypeScript project. It's taking TypeScript project from the Projen library and initializing a new class. You have to give it a name, and you have to give it a default release branch, because when Projen was first developed, most companies still use master as the default, and now they use main as the default, and you have to feed this in order to basically for it to work. They require that you pass something in, whatever it is, and most people use main now. Those are only two required things. For package managers, it does support all the package managers I mentioned. Yarn Classic, Yarn Berry, PNPM, NPM, and Bun are all supported. And by default, it's going to use Yarn. I like PNPM. This example snippet that I grabbed uses NPM. That's not a required argument. It'll be Yarn by default. And these others are the defaults already. The source directory and the test directory, it's going to scaffold these directories for you automatically and put just one sample index.ts file and one sample test file in there for you, which you can then delete and do something else with. But it basically starts you out with a full-blown hello world application written in TypeScript is how that starts. And the last line that's important here is 12. And that is what actually builds your files. So everything else before that is just configuration. It's in memory. It's a class file somewhere. It's objects inside of objects inside of objects. When you run synth, that is a synthesize command. And this is common in all the Projen project types. It's also the way that CDK works. It's kind of a thing that the whole AWS family of software, these pieces of software I'm talking about does it. When you run synth, it goes ahead and generates all the files for you that define your entire project. And an example of what a couple of those look like, it also writes your package JSON, by the way. So none of what I just talked about is like start by building a project, a package JSON, right? So it builds this for you. And you'll notice on line 68 here, there's a line that says it was generated by Projen, and to modify it, you need to run this command. The same thing with build YAML, which is just like a GitHub, build process YAML file. Each one of the files that Projen generates has a comment and whatever its native commenting syntax is to let you know that Projen generated it. Projen uses this as kind of a magic string also when it's looping over files, looking for things that it needs to recreate, although it tracks it internally as well. And the last thing is that it makes all of these files that it generates read-only. So you're truly not supposed to touch these files. Even your package JSON file, you're supposed to configure it using the tool, which seems a little awkward at first. I thought it was a little awkward at first as well. But if you think about the Uber use case for this, where you're managing a monorepo or you're managing 20 repos using a shared library that you have configured exactly the way that you would like it to be in the organization, especially if you're a security professional or even just a front-end dev that's the leader and wants to make sure that all the projects are configured the same, then being able to have this level of control over all the configuration files and locking them down to be read-only is quite nice. You can still override it in your IDE when it gives you the warning as a read-only. Yeah, override it, go ahead and save it, that's fine for debugging. Just know that later, when somebody runs Projen again, it's gonna blow all that up, whatever you did for debugging. So it generates all the files, they look about like that. And you'll see this note says that if you wanna make any changes, you edit this one TS file, the Projen RC TS file, and then you run a command that's npx Projen. And that's basically your entry point for all of this. You run npx Projen, it's gonna trigger this TS file to run, and it's gonna rebuild everything using that synth command. So what does npx Projen do under the covers? And if you look deep down into the bowels of all the configuration for Projen, it's basically running this. And you can change the tooling for this if you want. By default, it uses TS node. It feeds in a dev JSON that it builds. There's a default one that it constructs for you, which you can turn off if you want. So it uses this TS config, and then it runs this one TS file that is a chain reaction that digs down deep into all of the Projen code and generates your whole project. And so this is basically the nuts and bolts of how you rebuild your project if you're using Projen. This will also work with a monorepo. If you've got 30 subprojects or 1,000 subprojects in a monorepo, this will regenerate all of the monorepo, all the subprojects, all of everything with one quick command. One convention that the community uses, and the docs even suggest that you should do this, is to make an alias for npx Projen, because you run it a lot, and make it PJ. That's kind of the convention that people use. So in this case, on a Mac, I'm using ZSH, and my ZSH RC file, I just have a little alias in there. So anywhere that I want, I can just do PJ, and that is going to rebuild my project. If I'm check out something new from GitHub, or I need to rebuild my project for any reason, really, I can just use that PJ command. While you're doing development and you're editing that Projen RC file to add, do I want to use npm, or maybe I want to use yarn? What does it look like if I configure ESLint differently? As you're playing with it and you're continually making changes, you can add a little watch flag and it will watch the file, and as you're editing it, it will change all the files for you, which is really nice because you can have git diff open in another window, or even the file open that, ESLint config, if you're messing with that, open in a separate code editor window, and you can see it changing in real time while you're changing the configuration options. And that's it for now, except for code. I'll go to the code here in a second, but I'll stop for a second. What questions do we have? Yeah. Yep. You could. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your needs are. I mean, so there's a couple of different ways that you can do monorepos depending on what your needs are. One is that you use something like workspaces. And in a workspace, all the projects kind of need to know about each other a little bit, and there's a workspace config file that makes them aware of each other. You may have paths set up in your TS config to make them aware of each other. Some things so that they all play nice together, right? In that case, you probably want all of it rebuilt every time because they're so interconnected, right? If you're not using workspaces, and it's really just like a bunch of folders, and each folder is a project, and they don't know about each other or care about each other, and there's no connection between them, then you don't have to connect them, and you could separate those out if you wanted to, and regenerate one at a time. But it regenerates pretty quick, and once you get the configuration down, you're not really doing it a lot. Once you've got this set up, you move on to writing your business logic and writing the code in the project itself, and you stop worrying about the configuration until you need to make a change of some sort. So, rebuilding it all isn't very painful, even if it's a lot, really. So you're asking why it wouldn't use a hash to speed up the regeneration process? I don't know. I mean, it's pretty fast without that. That's probably an issue you could open on GitHub, and someone would either explain why they looked at that and didn't do it, or maybe they would think that's a good idea. But I'm not really sure. It just basically rewrites all the files. Like, even if there's no change, it's just like nuke it and rewrite it, and it really doesn't take much time. So this tool is really just building your configuration. It's not running the code. So you're not going to run like TSC and compile anything with this. You can run that separately. And I have used Turbo Repo, which is similar. It solves a similar problem that NX solves in a different way. And it does use hashes. So there are other parts of your project that you may still want to use NX or Turbo Repo or some other tool like that in order to do incremental builds or build multiple parts of the monorepo. The source code itself, get that into the dist folder. You're not going to do that with this tool. You'll do that with another command that you run. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I would take a look at Projen and see if it fits in. It may not solve all the problems that you have, but it may still be a piece of it. Yeah, it really just runs, when you run PJ and it generates everything, but it's not just scaffolding, because with scaffolding, typically what I would consider scaffolding anyway is a starting point, and after that you're changing things by hand. And with this, it's not really a starting point that you're changing things later. You will build, for example, you might build a release pipeline for YAML that you build programmatically using the tool, and it has a starter for it. You may just have some steps you want to change. And you may have a monorepo with 30 subprojects. You add a new subproject. It's really just adding a couple of lines of code in your main core file, and you can split it up into includes or whatever if you want. I'm just not going to cover that, but and then that same release would be in your new repo as well, or you could optionally take it out. There may also be dependencies. There may be steps. You may only want to lighthouse check certain deployments. You may only want to, you may use jest in some places and vtest in other places. And so beyond scaffolding, it's going to know about those differences, and it also knows about the interconnected pieces. So if you have TypeScript configured and it's building a jest configuration, it's going to consider that when it's building the jest configuration. It's going to look and say, oh, are we using TypeScript? Well, add these lines if we're using TypeScript. Not using TypeScript, then don't add those lines. So you may change the fact that your TypeScript is configured a specific way, and it may change your jest configuration as a side effect. So that's not just scaffolding of the TypeScript piece. It also understands a lot of other interconnected pieces of it that are complicated to understand sometimes. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a vocabulary word we could probably discuss for a while, but it does some pretty cool stuff. Yeah, you could put if logic in there if you want to. It depends on how complicated you want to get. Let me see. So I was going to show. Probably have to bump this up a little bit. Oh, I'm not mirroring. Let me. Let me switch back to mirroring. Are we mirrored? Yep. Bump up the font here.
One of the things where I'm having is, for example, your package JSON, right? You have your version.
Yep.
If you are using some tools to have your change that being created that's run by the it's updating your, that's built to update your package JSON.
Yep.
How does that track with this?
So, if you want some depths and you say, oh, there's an already pre-populated one, so that one doesn't really make sense. But if you want, I don't even know what version of Tailwind we're at right now, but let's say it's Tailwind 4, something like that. Actually, this goes here. So if you want to make, there we go. I'm going to run PJ here in my little command when this is going to do. I think I'm answering your question. So if you want to add a dependency, there's depths, there's dev depths for your development dependencies. You can define them all here, and it's going to understand your sim versions, and it's going to put the exact version that you need to have in there. And then the upgrade script is going to continually look. There's a script that it builds that will run nightly or however you want to configure it, that will look for updated versions and attempt to bump that up inside your lock file for you. Same thing as what Dependabot does. I'm answering your question?
One of them, but this one would be like if I'm using this to release my package, right? Or my project of keeping track of the versions, and I'm using something in the first week, right? Up in the first year, you have the name of the package of the version of your project, and you're updating that, and you're using another tool that updates that. How does this not just completely go and reset it back to 0?
Sure. So here we go. There's some workflows that it builds by default. The ones that I have here are a build workflow, a PR workflow, and this one does some linting on your PR to make sure that you've got the title right, and then an upgrade script. So if we wanted a release script, what I would do would be to go here. I've got it specifically set. Where is the release package true. And I would say release to npm true. And then release pipeline is true. So these are all things that you would, figure out by reading the docs. However, I have predicted questions like this and had put them in my little example here. So I've just changed a few values to basically say we are going to be packaging this now. We're going to be releasing it to npm, and there's a release by itself. True means we're releasing it. There's a separate release to npm, release to like PyPy or whatever the other like package management systems are. So you can tell it to release to each one of those individually. So in this case, I'm saying build the release pipeline and release to npm. I'm going to run PJ again. It's going to do a couple of things here. Looks like it's detecting that the package file changed, so it's automatically going to recheck all my dependencies because it doesn't know what changed. It just knows the package file changed. Oh, well, it did need a new package. So commit and tag version is required in the release pipeline that it builds for you. So it's going to give you this release pipeline. Here it is. And there's also now an update, a separate update one. But here's your release pipeline. It looks like this. It checks out your code here. It's going to get some Git configuration stuff. It's going to set up npm. The thing that you're interested in, though, it's all kind of hidden. The complexity is hidden. So it runs Projen's release process, which actually your version always stays at 0 inside the file. And what it does is it goes and looks at what the most recent version is that's been published, bumps it up by 1, and then it releases it that way. So it checks that back into Git and does whatever it needs to do in order to build your package and put it on npm, and then it puts it back at 0 again. Is that answering your question now? That's how it bumps the version.
So it has to use whatever Projen release.
You can build your own pipeline. You can completely sidestep this and just build a YAML file by hand if you want to. You don't even have to use what it uses. So if there's a process that you like that you just can't figure out how to wedge into Projen, or you're incrementally adopting this and you're not comfortable trying to build every last stinking configuration file using Projen, then you can incrementally do it. And if there is some kind of a pipeline that you have that this doesn't support, then you can still keep it yourself. And I'll show some of these commands. If this was the first thing I was planning on talking about, except that we had questions, and I think I've answered them all now. But what you'll notice is this package file, all the scripts basically are just calling Projen. They don't do anything that you would typically expect. You might expect to see some TS node commands or something in here. And what Projen does is it has its own task engine that will run tasks. So when it does a npm Projen or npx Projen release, that other code that the YAML file was calling, that's not just doing one thing, it's doing a lot of things, and that whole workflow is managed internally within Projen, and there's visibility into that. So you can kind of see what it's doing here. There's a special folder called Projen, and this is where Projen keeps track of artifacts and information about how you've configured your application. There's a file, and you can put these in Git. It's going to tell you what all the dependencies are, whether they're build dependencies, what version semantically you're looking for each of these. It's going to track all the files that it has put comments in. It knows what all of those are, so it's going to track all of those as well. But this is really what I was going to talk about, which is the tasks. So when you run Projen default, for example, where's default? Default is right here. So this is that command that I said that the default action. When you run npx Projen, it's running the default command, which is this. TS node project is running that Projen file. So when you do a build, which is like do everything, right? That is at the top of this. You can see that when you run a build using Projen, it's going to run that default, which regenerates all of your configuration in case something has changed. So if you have a pipeline somewhere up at GitHub and you're running the build command, this is all the things it's going to do. It's going to check and make sure that none of your configuration has changed. If it has, it's going to rewrite it. It's going to do a precompile step, which is blank by default. That's a hook. In case you have some step that you want to do here that is unique to your situation, you can put it in here. Otherwise, it just runs and does nothing. Compile is a step that will do what you expect. That's basically going to compile your TypeScript down to JavaScript or whatever engine you're using, it's what compiles it down to the distributable asset. Post-compile is a hook. It's blank by default. Test does two things. We can look down at this is spawning other tasks, basically. And the test task has two things. It does ESLint programmatically on the command line to make sure that all of your files are set up right, because even if you have it set up in your editor with Prettier to lint everything, somebody might not be following the rules. Somebody might have edited something by hand. So this process first lints everything to make sure that the syntax is the way that it's supposed to be, and then it will run Jest or vtest or whatever the testing engine that you're using is. And then this package step wasn't here until I changed that other file to say we're packaging this for distribution. So lastly, it would run the package step. And you can see some of the pieces that are important in the release here, like bumping the version based on the latest git tag generates a changelog entry. That's a step in that release. I'm just kind of going a smattering of all kinds of stuff here now, but the compile step for TypeScript, this is what you would expect TypeScript to be, TSC build. If you are using a custom build tsconfig file, that would just kind of magically appear here. But if you're just using tsconfig, the default tsconfig.json, you don't have to specify that here, so it doesn't by default. There's a command to eject. If you decide Projen's not for you and you want to go back to managing it by hand, you can run eject and it undoes all the progeny stuff so that you can basically just start wherever the last point was and continue from there. This is what the ESLint command looks like that it builds. It ESLints some very specific files in some very specific ways and folders. This is all customizable. A couple different installs. You might want to use a lock file for CI, no lock file for regular install locally. Here's your package. You were wondering how it packages and releases things. It makes this dist folder, and then it uses pnpm pack because it knows, because I put pnpm as my package manager, it's replaced like 20, 30 places in the code that matter, that need to know about pnpm. And one of them is how pnpm packages things. So this is specific language about how to pack up a pnpm release. This is these hooks, the post and precompile. There's no exec. See how these have an exec command steps? There's nothing. They're just blank hooks for now. So nothing's happening there. And then your release. You were asking about release. It's going to remove the dist folder, bump up the version, do a full build, unbump the version again, and then it looks like it's doing some git. I'm really bad at command line git, so that's doing a diff. You can see again here the ESLint and the Jest that I was talking about. This is the test step. So it's going to do, and for some reason I thought it did ESLint first, but it looks like it does Jest first. And then it will update, it does snapshots by default. Again, you can turn that off. So some of the things that I like to do when I'm messing around with it, by default, it puts your Jest config inside the package JSON file, which I dislike. I would rather it be a separate file. So these are some customizations that I usually make. I've separated my Jest file out to a different file. If I comment this out and run Projen, again, PJ, oops, thought I was down in this lower part. So it's going to rebuild it real quick. And we'll be able to see. I'm gonna look at tower because I really, again, I don't like command line, but this text is going to be too small for you. You might be able to see, even though you can't read it, this is the block of Jest stuff, configuration that just got moved into my package JSON. If I take that back out, where is it? And run PJ again, you'll see the git diff has changed and that block is gone. So this is all that's different. It's some minor things, but that Jest config is back in its own file again. So it's real quick to swap things around like that. There's also some customizations you can make. If you have a specific VS Code config that you like for your project team to share, you can extend what they call a component. This is an idea that's also part of AWS CDK. It's a library that both of these projects use to create a component that is aware of the project that it belongs to and a bunch of other metadata about the project, basically. And so you can say, I've got a configuration for VS Code. I'm going to create a class that represents how I want that configuration to look. A bunch of stuff that basically ends up, in order for me to run it, I can take that whole class that I just kind of breezed through real quick and make that a distributable package, or put it in a subfolder to call, or whatever, however I want to hide that complexity away and share it across projects. And then in order to use it in my project, all I have to do is say that I build the new one, I pass in the project. This kind of attaches that configuration to the project, so it knows where the root folder is, where that .vs code folder needs to go, where the settings file. This is by passing in the project, it knows all that about where the project lives. And if you have a monorepo and you want VS Code configured differently for some of the sub-projects because they don't use TypeScript, or they, I don't know, for whatever reason you want to configure differently, you can configure it differently for each one by passing in that individual project. And the way that you do a monorepo, if you want sub-projects, I'll show you that real quick. Right before the sent here, I'm going to add name and default release branch are the only two required things. So I'm going to say this is my sub-project. And in order to add that to my main one, I just say my parent is project. So, got to give it a different name. Foo. What does my formatter not like? There we go. It didn't like my white space. All right, because I didn't have the VS Code in there, config in there. So I'm going to run PJ again. I've added a sub-project now. Oop, I know what I probably complained about, but I know what I missed here. Out directory is going to be in packages. Foo. Let's see if it likes it now. Hold on. I missed something else that it wants. Sub is declared, but its value is never read. So this is just a linting rule that I am violating, that I created a variable that I then never used. So it comes with, out of the box, some pretty strict kind of linting, some very nice, strict, but also nice linting in, for ESLint and Prettier. So it just stopped me from declaring a variable that I never intended to use, which is a good thing. I really shouldn't do that. So now, if I look in here, it's created this packages foo, and I've got this whole other sub project with its own package JSON, its own tsconfig, and this is where, if you can imagine a world where you have a for loop or some other kind of structure that you loop over that defines the configurations for all your projects, and you're just looping this new project with out directories named after some variable in your core config, you can really centralize a lot of your configuration for your sub-projects this way. The question of stop, which I'm afraid means that I've just gone completely off the rails in what I'm doing here. What other questions do people have? Because it's faster. Yeah. Especially for monorepos. Yep. So much faster. I can't even, when I use GitHub pipelines and I'm building my project, caching the PMPM is actually slower than just downloading it all over again. It's so fast.
What does it look like if like a new testing framework comes out, or like a new package? Who has to update one?
So the team that manages the Projen project is constantly coming up with these sorts of things. There's one guy that I've talked to a lot that lives in Portugal that's really involved in it. And his whole thing was, we have been using Turbo Repo to manage, for a monorepo, if you're building all your projects, you know, and there's just a lot of build time. So Turbo Repo helps you shortcut and only build the things that have changed, right? And but there's no Turbo Repo component. And NX is another engine that does something similar. There's a lot of these things that attempt to solve similar problems in different ways. And there are some core commonalities, like what are the inputs that change? What are the outputs that are like your artifacts that come out of your build process, basically? And how do you determine what's really changed, what really needs to be rebuilt? and figuring out how can we make components within Projen itself that don't care about NX or Turbo or any of those sorts of things. It just tracks the inputs and the outputs, and then you can put in your own engine, right? So those sorts of ideas are always being talked about. There's a very active, the issues are very active. They're very welcoming to PRs if you want to make a change. And if it's something that's really, you think your organization is the one doing it that way, you can build your own component in the same way that I'm building this VS Code config component. This is like a custom component that I just built and included in here. I use it in a lot of projects. There's a reason that I included it here. But you can then share this out among, you know, other people in your organization. So there's kind of a analysis that you have to do there. Is it faster for me to come up with a custom Projen component that I can use across the enterprise? Or is it faster for this one oddball thing just to do it by hand because Projen doesn't support it and I don't want to have to worry about trying to build it, right? And sometimes the answer is just do it by hand. Like I've been doing some Astro, like static site development, and Astro really wants that config.mjs or CJS file. Is not really, you know, it's JavaScript. It's not an object. It's not easy to serialize out of a tool like this. And I just don't put that in Projen. I just keep it out by itself. So you don't have to have everything in there.
One follow-up question. You want file generation. Is there like a system or framework for code generation?
No, it's its own. So I've got Projen here, just in case we had a question where source code would matter. If you look at the source code, which I end up doing periodically to solve some kind of a weird problem, YAML files are built using a component, this YAML file component, which extends object file. And if you look at this, this is basically some of the arguments you can pass in, like what is the line width for the YAML, you know, spacing is the argument that you can pass in. If you look at the thing that it extends, it's also storing what the object is that you're going to serialize, overrides, whether you're omitting empty items, you know, in your YAML config, and then it extends yet another thing, which is the file base. And this gets down to, this is the thing that extends the component. So the file base is what generates basically all the files are from this file base. What path is it going to get stored at? Is it read-only or not? You can mark it as executable. I build SH files sometimes. Like I do a lot of work with AWS, and if you use a CDK, you need to bootstrap the accounts to work with CDK, and that's just command line baloney that you don't want to manage. So I use Projen to generate a .sh file that bootstraps all my environments, and I use it to write my config file. There's a little folder in your personal directory that keeps all your configurations for all the accounts and regions that you need to log into and SSO stuff. And I use it to build that too, Projen, just a little custom thing that I built. But my point is really, sometimes you need it to be executable. So all of this is really just part of Projen, the file writing. It depends really. If it's structured data like an object and you're just serializing it differently, like TOML is probably really easy because it's just a different kind of YAML-ish kind of format, right? You just got to figure out how to output that. There is an issue open right now where I think it's ESLint. It's one version behind in Projen because JSON file and the newest version of ESLint deprecates that and wants you to use a .js file for config. And there's no writer for JS files because it's not simple. It's not like just structured data. It's opening a function and closing a function and if statements, and it's not the same. So there is a issue right now and a couple of people working on that, but it's just like any open source project. If it's a problem that it hasn't solved yet and you've come across it, look around, build it yourself, ask a question in issues. Almost always when I ask something in the issues, there's another person that's got exactly the same problem and has been working on it in the dark in their own organization for a while, and we collaborate in some way and get to a solution.
I'm sorry, like I'm just exactly very I have to get back to the part of my personal use case. It's just a batch. I got a batch.
Yeah.
I don't plug in for plug in my batch system. It just manipulates it. So like my switch over from well, say we're gonna come in my manage their Node.js project that they're using same thing is why my brain is not. It's an npm
Yeah. There's lots of things you can do. One other thing that I've done, I think I may have just messed up, but another thing that I played with and is just makes my brain hurt, and I always stop halfway through, is you can hook into the TypeScript AST engine basically and programmatically build a TypeScript file by saying like open if file. There's like all these functions that you can basically call that build the AST, and then TypeScript itself has the same as what this synthesizes based. You were asking what the engine is underneath. The TypeScript has one of those. So you can programmatically build a TypeScript file using the TypeScript AST code itself. And that may end up being something that they end up tying into to do this. I've tried it and it really hurts. It's a lot. You're writing 100 lines of code to generate 5 lines of code. It's heavy.
I think you have time for maybe one more question.
With a project file, if you need to update dependencies, how would you do that?
So it comes out of the box with this update script. It's changed it a little, but it basically is an update script that runs on a schedule. I'm not sure what that works out to be, like every night or something at midnight, and it will, it attempts to upgrade any packages that have, based on your semantic, if you've got the tilde or if you've got the little up caret thing, it'll attempt to find a newer package version of everything that you've got in your repo, and then it will make a PR for you and attempt to run all your tests if you've got tests to make sure that it works. And there's a thing you can figure in here that will even auto-approve that PR. If you're really confident that you've got thorough tests and the new version, if it passes, could be in your main, then you can automatically have it go in your main. So it has a pretty robust upgrade script already in it. The things Dependabot does that this doesn't do are Dependabot will send you like security alerts if there's a security problem. And this will have that in the output as part of your update script, but it's not gonna like send you an email like what Dependabot does to tell you you've got a package with a security problem. So there are still some differences there.
So I feel like I have to choose between this and like really over investing in like client side build. Like a ton of scripts that help me in the system. Why are the build files a bad idea? Why is this a bad idea?
What do you mean by build file?
Scripts that are not meant to be run at one time, they're meant to be run like during life cycle of development, or during like the build process.
Well, I mean, this has a lot of really good defaults. It has a lot of really smart decisions made. There are some things that aren't perfect, like its default tsconfig likes to use common JS. So if you're really exclusively, using modules only, then you may have a problem with that. But it does have some pretty smart defaults. It has smart linting defaults. It has smart upgrade defaults. And so really out of the box, like just with the couple lines of code that I showed at the beginning that was really short, just doing that npx Projen new TypeScript is gonna out of the box have you a pretty decent start. So you've written nothing. So I guess that's the advantage. If you've invested a lot in your build scripts and you have all these scripts, that you've already built, Projen may not be a great solution for you. But another one of the things that I think it helps, if you're in a larger organization, back to these use cases, like a security professional that wants to make sure the same security rules are applied across all of the projects, then you can use Projen to build a package that gets distributed and included in all of those. And that ensures that you have consistent, very consistent security piece of the pipeline in there. And the upgrade script also, I just remembered, even if you've got packages, it will look and see if there's updates to dependencies in your package, update them, do the PR, approve it, and then send a new package to NPM. So at 2 in the morning, it can do all that and release a new package for you automatically. Just thinking of it because you mentioned those build scripts. So it's really, there are 100 ways to skin a cat, and this is just one of them. I happen to like it a lot because it's programmatic. Like I feel really nice building TypeScript that makes everything work and not having to do all by hand.
Sounds like it's got some good default.
Yes.
Thank you so much.